Have you ever heard of Archimedes' death ray? It's an ancient Greek myth that dates back to 212 BC and tells a story of how Archimedes used bronze shields to concentrate the sun's rays to set fire to invading Roman ships. This ancient idea has evolved into modern-day concentrated solar power, CSP, where instead of using shields to concentrate the sun's light, we use mirrors. And instead of setting ships on fire, we use the heat to drive a steam generator. But does CSP make sense in the modern era, or should it stay ancient history? In this video, I'm going to talk about how CSP works and the different technology options. We're going to look at how it's different from solar photovoltaics with or without batteries, plus I'll explain why I think CSP's time to shine might have arrived. I'm Rosie Barnes. Welcome to Engineering with Rosie. Concentrated solar power, or CSP, is surely the coolest looking energy technology. So cool, in fact, that it was used by the villain in a Bond film, The Man with the Golden Gun, in 1974. So here I am telling you that the cool futuristic technology that's going to help solve our energy crisis is the same cool futuristic technology that was going to solve the oil crisis back in the 1970s. Okay, so it looks futuristic, but it's not new now, and it wasn't even new when that Bond villain was blowing stuff up with his solar laser 50 years ago. That story that I mentioned at the start, that Archimedes was concentrating the sun to set Roman ships on fire more than 2,000 years ago, well, most people assume that story was a myth, but in 1973, a Greek scientist demonstrated how mirrors can be used to reflect and concentrate light onto an object at a distance of 60 meters away, causing it to catch fire within minutes. His experiment showed us that this ancient tale may not have been just a legend after all. In more modern times, CSP's first documented use was in 1866 when Auguste Mouchot used parabolic troughs to heat water and produce steam to run the first solar steam engine. And then in Egypt in 1912, CSP was used to power steam pumps to irrigate vast areas of the desert. The first operational concentrated solar power plant was a 1 megawatt system built in Italy in 1968. Then the oil crisis happened and caused a flurry of activity to develop alternative energy technologies, including CSP. As a result of this, by 1982, there was a 10 megawatt demonstration project in the United States, which was incrementally developed up to about 350 megawatts by the late 80s. The oil crisis had ended by that time, so it was a bit of a dead end for a while in the US at least. In the early 2000s, there was a lot of CSP action in Spain, and by 2010, there were 34 CSP plants worldwide, totaling 880 megawatts. Fast forward to today, there is over 5 gigawatts worldwide, spread mostly between Spain and the US, but with China and other countries starting to catch up. So that is a lot of growth in fits and spurts, but nothing like the rollout of other renewable energy technologies, solar PV and wind, which also started small in the 80s and 90s, but are now each nearly 200 times the installed capacity of CSP. So since CSP has been around so long, surely it would already be a mainstream energy source if it was ever going to be. Or maybe not. I think until now, CSP has been a technology ahead of its time, but that might be about to change. To explain why I think that, let's start with how it works and the different technology options available. Concentrated solar power works by concentrating and capturing the thermal energy from the sun into a focal point. It's pretty similar to a kid using a magnifying glass to concentrate sunlight to burn a hole in a piece of paper. This concentrated heat can be used to heat a fluid such as molten salt, which can be stored for hours or days. The heat is used to create steam to power a steam generator, which is the same kind of generator used in a traditional thermal power plant like coal, conventional gas, or nuclear. There are three main ways that you can concentrate the sun's heat, using either a tower, a couple of variations of a trough design, or a dish. The tower design, also known as a power tower or central receiver, has a receiver on top of a tower that's surrounded by hundreds of heliostats, which are small individual sun tracking mirrors that reflect the sunlight onto a single point at the top of the tower. This concentrated light heats up the receiver, which contains a heat absorbing material such as molten salt. The heated molten salt then travels to storage tanks below the receiver. Instead of concentrating at a single point on a tower, you can also concentrate in a line using the trough method, also known as a linear receiver. The trough mechanism is curved in a parabolic shape and tracks east to west following the sun. It focuses the sunlight to a line which contains heat transfer fluid blowing down that linear receiver. There's also a variation, the Fresnel, aka linear trough, which instead of a mirrored trough uses mirrors in facets that move individually and focus everything onto a long thin receiver. In this case, the receiver doesn't need to move since the the mirrors move instead. The advantage is that the whole thing is on the ground, so you need less supporting structure. And because the receiver doesn't need to move, it's easier to deal with the heating fluid, and you could potentially directly heat molten salt instead of the thermal oil that's typically used in the trough designs. And finally, there are dishes. They use parabolic mirrors to focus sunlight onto a receiver. The mirrors and receiver can move in 2 axes, so the entire area is always facing straight at the sun. This makes them more efficient than the other options. With a tower, in the morning and the afternoon, the sun's glancing off it at quite a low angle, and so the projected area of the mirror to the sun is quite small relative to its area. And the troughs track east to west, but when the sun's low in the sky in winter, the whole trough is seeing an oblique angle, so its energy capture is compromised too. The dish is the most efficient method, and it was popular early on, but they've pretty much vanished commercially, mostly because it's more complex than the other methods. Because the receiver moves with the dish to follow the sun, the pipe that transports your hot fluid has to move too, so you've got to move liquid hot stuff through axes of rotation. Or you can avoid that by generating electricity at the receiver, but then you lose the major advantage of CSP, which is its storage capability. So those are the main technology options for CSP, and like in so many other technologies that I cover on this channel, there's a trade-off here between efficiency and complexity. Most of the installed CSP plants use a trough design, but the companies that are most aggressively expanding these days are tending more towards the tower design. If you're interested in learning more about the special parabolic mirrors used to reflect the sun's rays, then brilliant.org is the perfect resource to help you do just that. They are the sponsor of today's video. Brilliant.org brings STEM concepts like math, science, and computer science to life through a visual and interactive approach, which helps the concepts stick because you learn by doing, not just by memorizing. Whether you're a student, educator, or technology enthusiast, Brilliant offers thousands of topics to explore with new content added every month. If you want to learn more about the concepts you need to understand CSP, then I suggest you check out Brilliant's lessons on parabolas to interactively learn the maths behind this special shape. Or check out the lesson on reflections, where you can hone your intuition on how light bounces off surfaces through interactive simulations. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/engineeringwithrosie or click the link in the description. The first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Because CSP generates electricity from the sun, it's tempting to consider it as a direct alternative to solar photovoltaics, PV. And in the early days for both technologies, around the 90s, that was pretty much how it was treated. Northern Europe, with more cloudy weather unsuitable for CSP, did photovoltaics, and Spain, with clearer skies, did CSP, without any storage at first. Until about 2010, PV and CSP were fighting it out on cost per kilowatt hour. Then the cost of energy from PV dropped much faster. This was due to its steep cost reduction curve, helped by the fact that it was largely Northern European countries pushing hard on renewables rollout in the 2000s and 2010s. And that kind of brings us to today, where energy from PV costs less than half what it does from CSP. I don't think anyone expects this trend to reverse, so CSP has simply lost the battle to be the dominant solar power technology. But that isn't the right battle for CSP to even be in. PV provides very cheap power when the sun is shining, but only when the sun is shining. In the early days of the energy transition, when there wasn't much solar power in the grid, that was all that was needed. The grid could soak up whatever amount of solar whenever it was generated, and everyone just wanted as many renewable kilowatt hours as possible for as cheap a price as possible. PV did that amazingly well. So well that by now some grids, like Australia's, are starting to have significant solar penetration, enough to be really affecting the way the electricity grid operates, and negative prices and curtailment of renewables during very sunny days have become really common. CSP won't cause problems like this because in addition to generating power, it can store it. And this fact provides 3 benefits when used in today's grid. 1, you can provide power after the sun sets, and 2, you can take advantage of higher electricity prices, so the value is greater, meaning it's not as relevant that the cost from energy from CSP is higher than from PV. So that's great and all, but obviously CSP isn't the only form of storage for renewable energy. Battery storage has come a long way since the early days of solar versus CSP, and surely we can simply add a lithium-ion battery to a PV system to get the best of both worlds. Cheap energy generation from PV and cheap energy storage from batteries. Does CSP lose again? Maybe not. And that's because of benefit number 3, that the cost of energy from CSP actually gets cheaper as storage duration increases, which is the opposite of what happens with a PV plus battery system. There's a few reasons why. First, having storage means that you don't need to use the energy right when it's generated. So in the middle of a sunny day, when the grid is totally saturated with solar power and some of it is being curtailed, you're able to store your energy for later and so avoid curtailment. Second, because CSP includes an expensive steam turbine, adding storage capacity means that you can run that turbine much closer to full capacity, 24/7 if you want to size it that way. CSP is an expensive way to convert sunlight to electricity, but it's very cheap storage. In contrast, PV panels plus a battery are very cheap conversion of sunlight to electricity, but expensive storage. So if you only want 1 hour of storage, it's great. But as you increase the storage duration to 6 or 12 hours, say, then the battery gets more and more expensive, and CSP then becomes a cheaper option. At long durations, its cost is on par with pumped hydro, which is my other favorite long duration energy storage, especially when it's off-river pumped hydro, which you can check out in this video. Above all, CSP is a generator with storage, so you can rely on it. It shouldn't be competing against solar PV. It should be competing against traditional coal and gas turbines. And that's why I think CSP's time to shine is coming up soon. Coal is exiting the grid around the world, whether because of government action or as cheaper renewables destroy their business case. The latter is what's happening here in Australia, where 1/3 of coal power plants have already announced they'll close by 2030, and more announcements are expected to take that up to about 2/3 closed by the end of this decade. Coal contributed nearly 60% of Australia's electricity last year, and 2/3 of that is not going to be available in less than a decade. To replace it, we'll need hours of storage, longer than what lithium-ion batteries can provide cheaply. But can CSP really supply electricity that we will be able to rely on? It's still based on solar power after all, and even though we can be reasonably sure that the sun will rise every single day, sometimes it's cloudy and CSP needs fairly clear skies to work well. Plus, the energy is stored as heat, and we all know that hot things cool down, so that energy will be gradually lost if we try to store it for days, weeks, or months at a time. Actually, neither of these issues are as big a deal as you might think if the CSP is located appropriately. There are lots of desert locations where skies are clear nearly all of the time, and when they're not, that's forecastable. What will be needed in a fully renewable electricity grid will be firm dispatchable capacity, meaning it's always available when you need it. It doesn't mean 24/7 constant electricity generation, because demand isn't constant 24/7, and also because solar and wind power provide much cheaper energy when it's available, so we'll use those when we can, and we mainly just want to fill in the gaps when it's not very windy or sunny. But you do need power to be always available. Gas turbines traditionally fill that role. They mostly sit idle, and then every evening or whenever the price goes up, you fire them up. But they're far from 24/7 constant generation, and crucially, the times they're needed are mostly known quite far in advance. So if in the future we've replaced most of our gas generation with CSP, if the weather forecast says there are sunny or windy days coming up, the CSP plant might generate all night every night and a bit in the morning. But if we see a shortfall coming up in a few days, and also see that cloudy skies above the CSP plant are forecast on those same days, well, we'll just make sure it remains charged up. So you'd reserve your output for just the early evenings when it's most needed. The thermal storage only loses about 1% of its energy per day, so you can easily ride through several cloudy days like that. And in the locations where these systems are going, that's the longest that you'll need to. If you put 15 hours plus storage on a CSP plant, it can actually have very close to the same firming value as a gas turbine. It's almost always going to be there when you need it. And I know that people in the comments are going to latch onto that word almost. Almost always available isn't good enough for the grid overall. But the last tiny little bit of reliability, and we're talking fractions of 1% here, the last little bit will be filled with something more expensive like hydrogen. Or even fossil gas would be fine, since it's practically never used and therefore creates practically no emissions. And remember that all of our generators are only at best almost always available. Coal, gas, nuclear, whatever, they all have unexpected shutdowns that need to be planned for. Like I mentioned before, pumped hydro systems with 15 hours storage can do much the same thing at the same cost as CSP. So we could end up with pumped hydro in the mountains and CSP in the deserts to keep the lights on once all the coal has closed. To replace coal power plants, we're going to need large-scale solutions. A CSP plant needs to be quite big to be cost-effective, largely because it uses steam turbines and they're much more efficient when they're bigger. I mean, no one makes a 1 megawatt coal-fired power plant anymore, and for the same reasons, you wouldn't make a 1 megawatt CSP plant. You're looking at 50 megawatts and upwards. So that sounds big, and it is big compared to a single PV panel. But if you think about the size of a coal power plant, Australia's largest Eraring power station, which is going to retire in 2025, is 2.8 gigawatts. So to replace that with CSP, even if you're building a 100 megawatt unit, say, you'll still need to build 28 of them. So can it be done? Given that CSP has been around for ages and yet seems to remain remained a kind of fringe technology, you might assume that previous experiences have been bad. Otherwise, wouldn't we see a whole lot more CSP plants around the world? In fact, some of the plants in California that were built in the 80s are still running after 40 years, so it's not that. It's just that until coal power plants actually start closing in large numbers, we don't yet need the type of generation and storage that CSP provides. But coal plants are closing soon, and CSP, or whatever long-duration storage technology you prefer, these don't just spring up overnight the day a coal power plant closes. It takes around 3 years to build a CSP plant, so a little forward planning would be beneficial if we want a smooth transition away from coal. There are movements in the right direction. Countries like China, Morocco, and others have started installing a lot of CSP, and here in Australia, we're finally starting to talk about a mechanism to incentivize long-duration storage in a similar way to how renewable energy certificates have been incentivizing renewable generation for years now. So I expect big things from CSP in the next few years, and I'll be following closely to see how it plays out. I got a lot of generous help from Dr. Keith Lovegrove for this video. Keith taught me thermodynamics at uni about 20 years ago and has been working on CSP for even longer than that. He's agreed to be a guest expert on a live stream on CSP technology that's coming up in about a week, so if you've got questions or ideas, please write them in the comments, or even better, join us live. As always, big thanks to the Engineering with Rosie Patreon team, whose support is the reason why I'm able to get paid help researching and editing these videos. If you'd like to join the team, there's a link in the description and there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.